Okay, so we're live, ladies. Thank you for being here. Welcome to another Freedom Summer 2020, Freedom Friday. And I am so
Amen.
grateful that you are here with us. Freedom Summer is a campaign to mobilize 1 million Black voters. The initiative, led by the Black Church Action Fund, combines civic education with political action to empower efforts that liberate us from oppressive systems and foster a beloved community. And I'm so glad and excited about tonight's discussion, which I think is much needed. My name is Elisa Cupid. I'm a minister in the First Episcopal District of the AME Church, serving at the Greater Allen AME Church of New York. And joining me tonight is Reverend Dr. Myrna Thurman Malone, who is a pastoral psychotherapist, founder and clinical director of MHT Family Life Center. Also joining us is Reverend Maureen Gerald, who serves as executive pastor of Shiloh Baptist Church in Trenton and has a private practice, momentum counseling, coaching, and consulting, and is also a spiritual director. And we have with us Minister Barbara Florville, who's assistant to the pastor for youth at Alfred Street Baptist Church. Welcome, ladies. How are you doing
Thank
today?
you.
Thank
Good.
you. Okay, I'm
Well,
so glad.
thank you.
I'm so happy to have you here today. And I thank you for being here, especially on this day where we recognize the 57th anniversary of the March on Washington.
Yes.
This year's march is a commitment march entitled Get Your Knee Off Our Necks.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that we're having this conversation on this day because we know that it is important to go out there and march. It's important to protest and demonstrate, but it's also important to have self-care. And tonight's conversation is about self-care and act of resistance. Tonight's conversation is actually a spin-off of a conversation that I had last week called Reclaiming My Time. And when we spoke about women reclaiming my time, one of our panelists or several of our panelists mentioned that one of the things that we need to reclaim as women, but I'm expanding this discussion beyond women, but we want to cover all Black lives. Um, is that we need to reclaim our bodies and we need to reclaim our well-being. So I was excited to have this conversation today because I think it's important that we talk about it and help people to understand what is taking place, understand exactly the impact of the current day and current season and what that impact is having on our bodies, on our minds, and our emotions, particularly when you look that we've been through or we're going through this pandemic. We have seen several Black people killed by police, even just this week. There's civil unrest, there's ongoing protests, and then on top of that, we're dealing with the antics of this administration, right? And I
Mm.
think I've heard several people say that we are living in a time where so many people are traumatized by it all. And in your profession, I would just love if you can just tell us, what does trauma look like in this season? Because some people are traumatized and don't even know it. So, can someone,
Mhm.
I would like for you to begin, Reverend Dr. Myrna, with what does trauma look like in this season?
So there are three types of trauma. You have acute, chronic, and complex. I would
Hmm.
say in this day and age, we are dealing with complex trauma because it's an ongoing experience of trauma, right? First, we have intergenerational trauma because of what we experienced being enslaved, our ancestors, right? And the
Mhm.
ongoing issues of social injustice, of dehumanization, of marginalization, and a bunch of other isms, classism, racism, sexism. And on top of this, here we are again in 2020 dealing with the same stuff. For
Mhm.
me, it's a modern day lynching,
Mm.
right? So no longer are they hanging us by our necks from trees. Instead, they are killing us dead in the street like animals, right? But
Mm.
one of the things for me that's another injustice is that we hear many comments about the young Black men and the men that are being killed in the street.
Mhm.
However, we have forgotten about the women that have been killed by police officers. Their names
Right.
need to be said more,
Mhm.
like Breonna Taylor,
Yes.
Nakia Board, Kaya Moore, Alexia Christian, Megan Hockaday, Maya Hall, Janisa Faville, Natasha McKenna, Sandra Bland, and many, many others.
Thank you. Say her
You're welcome.
name.
Say
Thank
her
you.
name.
So, Reverend Maureen, if you can just speak up there and also just build on that to how can one identify this trauma in their own lives, in the lives of their family members, those around them?
Yeah, I think to Dr. Myrna's point, at this juncture, I don't think the DSM is closed. I don't think, particularly as Black intellectuals, Black clinicians, that we can say that the DSM is closed on
Mm,
identifying the many different myriad types of
Mm.
trauma that is
right.
being experienced in Black space. We have historical trauma, we have intergenerational trauma, we have social trauma, and I
Mhm.
think because we are experiencing it all at the same time, this is
Mm,
such
Absolutely.
a pivotal moment in history where it's really unearthing so many things about who we are and how we breathe and how they stop us from breathing. And then
mm,
also what moving forward looks like for us. How do we once again press against the grain, press against the oppression and move forward, and how that is very much traumatizing to the body, to the psyche, and to the spirit. And so I would really say that when we look at trauma and how to really help us kind of know it, I think it's that pit in your stomach your mama used to tell you about,
mm,
that makes you feel nauseous and you haven't eaten anything to make you feel nauseous. So it's some of that simple anecdotal stuff that mama told you about how you're feeling, right? Your nerves, you're jittery.
Yes.
There's a restlessness. There is an absence of peace because until there's justice, there is no peace.
right, right.
Until there's justice,
Absolutely.
there is no peace. And so we're living with very sort of sporadic moments of peace, of centeredness, of tranquility. It's
Mm,
constantly disrupted by the violence and criminalization of Black bodies. And
mm,
every time I see a Black body being injured, killed,
mm,
um, by the hands of the whiteness, of the white gaze, right? It is my brother, it is my nephew, it is my sister, it's my niece. And so I don't see these people as separate from who I am because we are a
Absolutely.
people who understand the beauty and complexity of kinship.
right.
So because we hold space in kinship space, everybody is my cousin. And all of this matters to me. And I see myself there as a mother who's crying for her son or an auntie who's yelling out in rage against what officers have done. And so when we look at this, trauma absolutely looks like that pit that's in your stomach, the restlessness that we feel, insomnia, this clinical, we can't really sleep. It looks like it also looks like the rage that we're trying to name. I mean, rage is a good thing. There is righteous indignation, but the challenge of trying to name it, there's so many different things that we're
Right.
trying to name all at one time. These are all of our experiences and what it means to be in a state of spiritual trauma,
Right.
right? Really trying to find hope, as Cornel West has written, on a tightrope. And then that physical trauma, right? The body, what we feel in the body, and then the psyche, the trauma of what it means to look over my shoulder, right? Or to hold my nephew or my brother tight when we're walking down the street, right? So all of this anxiety inducing behaviors and experiences is all a part of the signs of trauma.
Right, right. Thank you. Minister Barber, I would like for you to hop in here and then also just your experiences, talk about your experiences in working with youth and young adults and how you might be seeing some of this displayed and manifested.
Sure. Thank you so much for having us. This is an awesome opportunity, and I'm glad to be on the panel with you both. So I would absolutely say that trauma in this time we have found is extremely compounded. It is the
Mm,
experience of social trauma and it's the experience of personal traumas. We can't get away from the fact that we're still in the midst of COVID-19.
right. Mhm.
So I
Yes.
think there's so much that trauma does to our minds and our bodies. And I feel like one way that I've come to understand trauma for myself is a feeling of often a sudden loss of power a loss of agency. It can be sudden, it can be gradual, but ultimately it is the loss of being able to take control over an area of my life or area of my ability to make decisions. So the reality is that trauma is real for everyone, Black, white, Asian, everyone, right? But the fact that Black people experience trauma at the hands of injustice adds to the reality of our lives, right? We can't just know that, our tooth is going to fall out one day, right? Or we might experience
Right.
some back pain because we work in a particular area, right? But we also unjustly experience a lot of pain that we don't have to. So much of the trauma that we experience as Black people is uh, not just from life, it's from powers and principalities. So as a minister of young people, the questions that I'm hearing that sound like trauma is, will I die?
Mm.
Why do white people hate me? Why does the police officer across the street looking at me like that? Will I die because of the color of my skin? So I have 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds in our Kid Street program asking these morbid questions because of the bodies that they're in. So trauma looks like existing, fearing a lack of existence, I think, in some way, shape, or form. And I think another aspect of trauma now for people of color is that we just experience this compounded experience of loss and grief. And it happens one after the other, and that there isn't an opportunity to grieve fully, to grieve properly, and that our grief is often coupled with having to fight for our own lives. So trauma is work. It's heavy work, and a reality for us, unfortunately. And I feel like our young people and our young adults feel that as they're going to college.
Mm-hmm.
Our young people feel that as they're going to college. They feel that as they are um, in middle school and high school. And I worry for them because these are their developmental years. So how do we teach them how to work on this?
Right, right.
Mm-hmm.
And I thank you for that. That's such that question. I'm just overwhelmed with the question of will I die, and that our youth are asking themselves this question and carrying around that weight of fear on them. Reverend Gerald, or Maureen, you I know are currently present in DC at the 57th anniversary of the March on Washington. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so just looking at that march, we know that we have been protesting for a long time. We have been speaking about equity and justice for centuries. And in fact, beyond this march, there's still ongoing protests we're seeking justice in the Breonna Taylor case. We're seeking justice for Jacob Blake, which is a recent attempted killing. So
Mm-hmm.
with all of this, the protesting that's taking place daily, the visual images that are on the screens daily of the persecution of Black bodies, the situation with COVID, and we're seeing that the disparities that um, there are with COVID, right? That it's mostly taking Black and brown lives. What
Mm-hmm.
do you say, or what can you advise people in terms of taking care of themselves, mind, body, and soul? What are some of the things that they should be aware of or attentive to, both emotionally and mentally?
Yeah. So let me begin by saying this. I want to share a quote from Dr. Gwendolyn Brooks that says, "We are each other's harvest.
Mm-hmm.
We are each other's business. And we are each other's magnitude and bond. We are each other's bigness," right? So if you can't shine because your day is just not a day where you can really get your shine on, so to speak, I'm going to shine for you. Instead of stealing your shine, I'm going to
Right.
shine for you. And so health happens in the Black experience in community. Care happens in community. And so caring for myself really looks like how others care for me and how I care for others. And so in that space today, moving with the crowd of people, For all of us who had the mask, who were exhausted and overheated by the mask, we had to take the mask off so that we wouldn't even overheat in all of the heat. But that act of resistance and the act of being determined to turn over evil, and find ways forward, find justice, demand justice, was all an act of how we're caring for each other. And
Right.
my presence there was an expression of how I care for my sisters and my brothers. It was the best way that I could care for Mr. Blake. It's the best way that I can care and honor Aubrey's mother. And so all of these acts, outside of some of the things that we've kind of heard, I think, in white culture about what it means to kind of sip tea and breathe. And I think those things have value, right? But
Mhm.
those are very sort of personal and individual ways in which we can reset, and
Right.
they have value in our identity, as self healers. But I think the other way that we heal is absolutely for us found in community. And so
Absolutely.
today, while it was tough and it was challenging, the heat, the exhaustion, the dehydration, the crowdedness, it was also, and at the same time, exhilarating and exciting and fortifying and inspiring and transformative.
Mhm.
So that is the beauty of the Black experience, is that it's this and it's that. And that we have the capacity, history tells us that we have the capacity to hold both, to hold both. And so that's what it looked like for us. I was really reminded of our dear sister, Sister Dr. Audrey Lord, who said that caring for myself is not self-indulgence; it is
Yeah.
self-preservation, and
Mhm.
that is an act of political warfare. So this is
Right.
where we are, and that's what the landscape was like on today. And even now, I sit in the hotel. I sit with no service in my room, right, because of COVID. So we don't have anyone attending to our room. It's something that we have to do
Mhm.
for ourselves, right? And so historically, for those of us who experience hotel stays, we've also experienced the service that accompanies the stay, right? And
Right.
so we're absent of that. So we really have to be our sister and brother's keeper in close quarters like this, right? And
Mhm.
I'm sitting here next to the window, Minister Elisa, and I'm hearing the rain just fall. The rain is falling.
Mhm.
And I think for me, I'm really just holding that in such a profound spiritual way, in terms of all that happened today concerning our health and our wellness, and our sickness, right? What's happening to us. So yeah, it's a lot. I am walking through it, but I'm not walking through it alone.
Right.
There's a community here with me that I know and that I get to meet.
Mhm. And I love that notion of community and keeping that in mind. And Dr. Myrna, what will we do in addition to building on a community and staying connected?
I agree with Reverend Maureen. Community is very important. If we just take a look back over all that we as Black women and Black men and Black community have experienced, we've done it in community. When I think about our ancestors being enslaved, when they had to give birth in the midst of oppression, knowing that
Mhm.
their children will be stolen and taken away from them, they did it in community. And so for us, we have to come together in community. We have to begin to love ourselves for who we are, the way we look, our shapes, our hair textures. We have to begin to support one another, support our Black owned businesses. We have to know our own power. So part of self care to me is the pursuit of justice and doing it together, being
Mhm.
able to protest like they're doing, being able to vote, making sure that we complete the census, making sure that we vote in every election, not just a presidential election,
Right.
making sure that we are aware of our own power and how much power we have collectively when we come together. And what I
Mhm.
mean by that is when we see injustices, then maybe it's time for us to move and support Black owned businesses that we
Mhm.
should have been doing all along. It's time for us to come together and be able to support our children and be present in the school system and be present at the Capitol, and be present when laws and legislation is going forth to make sure that our voice is heard. But if we don't vote, you know, if we think that our vote isn't going to matter, if we already count ourselves out, then we are living up to the Willie Lynch letters. You know,
Mhm.
we are living up to what they said that we would do by counting
Mhm.
ourselves out. And so I think that in community, we don't count ourselves out. We
Right.
come together collectively, we march together, but we also need to make sure that we are registering people to vote together, that we
Mhm.
are working together towards that, that we are caring for our elderly, that we are caring for our children, and that most importantly, we are caring for one another and being aware of our mind, body, and spirit collectively. And the
Mhm.
role of the church as we come together is not to promote that of cheap grace,
Mhm.
but to understand the need for justice. Right. And I
Mhm.
want to read Psalms
Mm,
82, verse 3.
mm,
It says, give justice to the weak and the fatherless, not meaning that we are weak, but the systems see us as weak and they treat us as such by taking away our right to just be human, right? Our right to just breathe. So we as a people need to come together to give justice to the weak, those who are
Mhm.
marginalized, to the fatherless, those who are marginalized, those who are oppressed, to maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute.
Right. That's good. That's good, Reverend Myrna. But I just want to unpack a little bit that cheap grace, and I'm gonna give each of you an opportunity to do that. For those that don't know what it is, can we just talk about that a little bit and what it looks like and the impact that that's having in our churches and in our community? That notion of cheap grace.
I start for me, I'm all for forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I understand that when we harbor feelings that they can impact our health, you know, it can create disease in our body. I get all of that. However, at the same time, if we are quick to move to forgiveness without reconciliation, without being able to go back and deal with the issue at hand, we are continuing to sweep things under the rug, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so Archie Smith talks about pimento, which means to uncover the painting, right, in order to repaint. And so for us, we need to uncover some social justices and some ills that are continuing to go on within our community in order to move forward. And as a country, the ills that have been brought against us have still not been dealt with. It's like
Mm-hmm.
we are just now getting to a place where we can really talk about injustice, where we could really talk about white supremacy, where we could really talk about racism, sexism, classism, where we can talk about economic injustice, when we could talk about education injustice. You know, and as a people, I don't know if we understand how our power to vote or our power to complete a census impacts those
Right.
dynamics, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so for me as a minister, as an ordained clergy, I understand the role of forgiveness, but I also understand the process that it takes to work through something, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I work with women who have been sexually violated, whether it be rape, molestation, and I'm not rushing them to forgive, right? They have to be
Mm-hmm.
able to process that experience, right? And go through whatever feelings they have. And when we push people to forgive too quick, right, we deny their experience, we deny their hurt, we deny their pain, and we don't allow them to fully become whole or to heal themselves, right? It's like we want to cover things up with the dirt,
Mm-hmm.
right? But we cannot continue to just cover things up. We have to pull back the dirt. We have to dig up some things in order to move forward, right? Sankofa, you know, we're looking back in order to move forward. We can't move
Absolutely.
forward without looking back.
Mhm, mhm. Thank so, Minister Barber, just even adding to that, that notion of cheap grace, if you like, but also speaking to the previous question as to what are some of the things that we should be aware of or attentive to emotionally, and mentally. What conversations are you having with young people in terms of their own well-being and having some sort of balance with everything that is taking place?
Yeah, I think that so much of. All right, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. So I think so much of the combination of the conversation on cheap grace and self care is question around what our churches teach theologically about both of these
Mm,
concepts. Cheap grace is really about accountability, a lack of accountability,
mhm,
and how there isn't follow through, right? God calls us to always become better, right? From glory to glory, right? For us to be sanctified, right? Not just to be saved, but to also do that work that
amen.
our faith requires us to do. So I think in terms of cheap grace, I think that is where we are lacking in terms of follow through with our teaching theologically. And I think that it hurts us in the long run to not hold people accountable, to not allow people to then step up. And I think we're speaking specifically about those who pertain to whiteness or subscribe to privilege of any sort. But I
Mhm,
think in general that's a reality. And as far as self care is concerned, my hope is that my young people know that self care isn't a trending topic. It's not
right.
a trendy idea.
Right.
It's not a millennial, experience or Generation X or Z. Right? It is. I believe it's a theological mandate. I believe that it's woven in how God taught us to
Mhm,
live and exist. It's woven in our creation story. That day 7 was a day of rest. That an omniscient and omnipotent God chose to rest. I
mhm,
think that means something as far as how we're to model our lives. So for my young people, I want them to know that self care isn't selfish. Self care
Absolutely.
isn't just an idea that you're just lazy and you just want to take some time to yourself and you're not committed to whatever work is before you. That
that's
self care
important.
is about upkeep of what God has blessed you with. So
Mhm,
some of the things that I want my young people to know is that during this time that you are experiencing probably a lot more challenges at one time than a lot of your adults have. So it's
mhm,
okay to ask for time. It's okay to ask for space. It's okay to say, okay, well, I've never experienced schooling like this, and neither have you. I think I need a moment. I
mhm,
think I need to
mhm,
be able to speak up for myself and claim power and claim agency. So, what I want my young people to know is that I believe self care is a theological mandate. God cares about how we care for ourselves, how we see ourselves, that God said it was very good when God created us, and that is about our identity, right? That nothing in the world can take away from that. And I also want my young people to know that self care is not a woman's work. It's not just a woman's work.
mhm,
Self care is for everybody, man and woman, male and female, everyone in between, however you identify, right? Self care is a courageous act.
mhm,
Um, and it allows all of us to be free in ourselves so that we don't then harm other people because we don't believe in our own freedom and that we would then
Absolutely.
take power over other people's bodies. So I think of all the Black women who are in spaces where they're trying their best to be about their self care life.
mhm,
But because maybe some of the men in their lives haven't done the work of loving on themselves, they're now
mhm,
hurting the women around them, right? So I think self care is something I want all of my young people to take seriously as something that is a divine act and work.
Can I add to that?
sure, sure, jump in.
Because Jesus can be our example as a form of self care because every time he did a miracle, he went away. He went
Mhm,
away from the crowd. But I think that we have been socialized to think that self care is a form of selfishness and
mhm,
that we do need to be able to teach that it's not about being selfish, it's about caring for our mind, our body, and our spirit. And so, if we are burdened down and heavy and broken, how can we care for other people,
mhm.
especially clergy?
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially women. We need more engagement around what self care looks like and how we can provide self care. As we become a container for people, we need to be able to create that space for us so we can be refilled as we have given out.
Mhm. And I think it's, as you mentioned, it is so important to know that it's not selfishness. Um, And I think that as blacks, we've often been told, right, as black people, especially black women, that you have to be strong. You always have to be strong. And I think that's a lot, also part of where a lot of the abuse and the oppression has come from, because historically, the way we were treated was because it was believed that we had this kind of like strength that was beyond human capacity, what was expected of a human being.
Right.
That teaching of you always have to be strong, I think that we tend to deny ourselves, deny that, as Minister Barbara, you said, that place where you say, I need a moment. I need a moment. Reverend Maureen, I would just like you to speak a little bit about, you spoke, self-care is community, and that is one form of self-care. But when a person takes that time to actually acknowledge and admit, I need a moment, what should that moment look like? Because sometimes they're carrying around all this anxiety, and occasionally, if I'm transparent, occasionally my moments look like maybe curling up, right? And it's not always the most healthiest moment. So, what
Mhm.
can people do with these moments when they have to take this moment for self care? What would you suggest that? What are some things that they can do
Yeah.
in addition to
Um,
community?
yeah. So let me say, because I do understand and continue to sort of really unpack and deconstruct this notion of self care and the
Mhm.
movement of self care, particularly in Black space, is that I really do see it and begin the conversation with it in the context of community. So even when
Right.
I'm not doing it with community, I'm doing it for community. That's just my truth. And I think any of
Absolutely.
us, if we're telling our truth today, I'm restarting and replenishing so I can be a better mother, a better partner, so I won't
Mhm.
kill somebody at the grocery store. Yeah, right. So these are our truths. Like we are
Right. Right.
resetting and realigning because we want to make our communities healthier, safer, sounder. We
Mhm.
want to show up so that we can handle the weight that we have to bear, right?
Mhm.
And so Dr. Shanangwa Walker Barnes talked about Too Heavy a Yoke, right? The book Too Heavy a
Yes.
Yoke.
Yeah.
And in that book she really explores the burden that Black women have in being strong and what
Mhm.
that all means. And so there is a
Mhm.
place of respite, there is a place of quiet, there is a place where we can be replenished. And that looks different in different spaces. And so I don't want to
Mhm.
necessarily prescribe a way in which we do that. I think that we show up
I
so
understand.
incredibly, outrageously creative that there's so many
Mhm.
different ways to do that. You know, whether I'm snuggled up with my boo or whether I'm
Mhm.
listening to some of the OJs and some Luther on the
Okay.
radio, you know, or whether I'm really sort of sitting in my garden and tending to the flowers in my garden and it's just me and the bees and the flowers. And so it just looks different.
Mhm.
Sometimes self care, it does look like me giving myself a good hair mask, right? And
Mhm.
just sitting with
Mm.
that hair mask until the next day. So
Mhm.
it looks different in different spaces
Right.
in the Black experience. And I think that's why we bring and need to bring a continued renewing and new conversation around what self care
Mhm.
looks like. I have millennial children, they're in their 20s and early 30s. And so I watch them engage in a moment of renewal and replenishment. And sometimes that's done in community with their sisters and brothers, and sometimes it is done sort of in their room with the door closed, and there's sort of a
Mhm.
known, right? A knowing that, okay, don't come into the room. I'm just like, just doing me. Don't come in, don't talk to me. So there's sort of this quiet time and this quiet moment.
Mhm.
So it looks different. It looks different, and I think it should look different. I don't think
Right.
there should be five ways to,
Right.
come back to ourselves. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, it looks different depending on who you are and what you need, what your healing requires.
Mhm. Okay. So one of the things that I did want to get at also is, I've been having conversations with people, who are still undecided, about elections and voting, and a few who are have a sense of weariness and
Mm.
despair. And the weariness and despair is the feeling of nothing's going to get better. still choosing between the lesser of two evils, despite who's on, regardless of who's on the ticket. And almost, I don't wanna say hopelessness, but probably almost there, heading in that direction or in that path. So as pastoral care providers, which you all are, what are words of hope that you can give to encourage people, in Black and brown communities to go out and vote, to go out and get involved? Not just the idea of, they're hearing so much messages about, go vote, you need to," but more, what's the hope in it that comes out of these actions and any other action? Because we have so many individuals out there who unfortunately can't vote, but there's so many other things that they can do towards, this movement for liberation, for justice, for equity. So what's the hope that you can provide?
For me, I think the hope is that once we vote, for us to be empowered to stay in the race, to
Mhm.
make sure that we are aware of what's going on in our communities, what legislation needs to be changed, and how can we in our community be involved in that, right? So it's more than just voting.
Right.
Right? You can put somebody in office, but what after the election is over, and then what? Because things don't happen overnight. Our right to vote didn't happen overnight, right? And
Mhm.
so we have to continue to stay in the fight. And the hope is that we do have the power collectively for change. It may not come overnight because we're still fighting for change. But for me, my hope is not in whoever is in the White House.
That's
My
right.
hope is still in God,
God.
right?
Mhm.
And that is who I'm looking to for my hope. And so for me, I can only do what I can do in my community, right? And so the next person can do what they can do in their community. But imagine what we can do collectively when we come together.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who'd like to jump in here?
Yeah. It reminds me of a recent interview that Ava DuVernay gave to Dr. Angela Davis in
Mm.
our current Vanity Fair. There's an article in there, and she asked her sort of this question about hope. Like, you've done so much work long before today, right? You are one of the sisters that have really sort of paved the way for us. And do you feel a sense of hope or satisfaction, or how do you rest in this moment, looking at the work that you have done and the work that we're trying to kind of pick up and find? And Dr. Davis said that I don't think about it in regard to sort of my own experience, this sort of individual experience, but I really think of it more in this collective experience, right?
Mhm.
That the hope really is found in our ability to encourage one another, to embrace one another, to really sort of fortify one another in this season and say, we're in this together. We can do this
Absolutely.
together. Like, the hope is in the collective move. It's the women on this call tonight, and we're looking in each other's
Right.
faces and saying,
Right.
we can do this. We have each other in our respective places. We're going to go back and we're going to let the community know that hope is absolutely still alive, and it's in each of us. And if we move
Mhm.
together collectively, we can turn the world upside down, as Paul talks about in
Right,
Acts.
right.
So yeah, yeah.
Yes, Minister Barber, please hop in.
Yes, we had a funeral today at our church at Alfred Street.
Mm.
We our Reverend Dr. Faye Savage Gunn. She is our was our interim pastor before Pastor Howard John Wesley, the first woman pastor to be at the church. We said goodbye today and sent her home.
Mhm.
And the scripture that really stood out to me was from First Thessalonians. We do not grieve as those who do not have hope. So I think about where we are as a
Mm.
nation. In order for us to have hope, it doesn't mean that we're not grieving. We're still grieving the fact that the last
Right.
4 years have happened. We're
That's
grieving the
right.
fact that there are people in America who want it to happen again. We're
Mm.
grieving the fact that we're experiencing all the things that we're experiencing today, but we do not grieve as those who do not have hope. So in our
Mhm.
grieving and our hoping, we go out and we vote. We vote as an act of
Mhm.
love. loving our neighbors as ourselves. And I would encourage the people who are still undecided to choose the vote that looks the most like love, that looks the most like kindness, that looks the most like patience,
Absolutely.
that looks the most like long suffering, that looks the most like not boasting, not tweeting, inappropriate things, seeing people, and women and men and children and the foreigner and the widow. So that would be my encouragement for those who are feeling hopeless, that we do not grieve as those who do not have hope, and that our vote can actually look like love. And I'd
Mm.
also like to say that I'm truly honored again to be on this panel with these people. But because of some consent form, I'm sure I signed some years ago, Reverend Maureen would not say this, but she was actually one of the people I went to when I needed self-care while I was in seminary in New Jersey. So I just want to thank God for her witness and the work that you're doing, Dr. Myrna, because it's because of you all that we still have a chance to learn how to hope against hope.
Right, right. And again, this is the collective,
Yeah.
as you all pointed out, The time goes by so quickly. So we're down to our last few minutes, and I just want to give each of you the opportunity to make final remarks on this topic of self-care as an act of resistance. I'm going to begin with you, Minister Barbara.
Sure. Self-care is an act of resistance. What I love about it is that it's so subversive, and that it's something we've been doing since the beginning of the Black story here in America. It was running away to hush harbors to worship our God. It was singing freedom songs in the field, and not just singing freedom songs just to soothe our souls, but as an actual language to get out and experiencing freedom in our realities. So I want to encourage people to think about all the creative ways that you can experience your own freedom and your own self-care. If that's writing, if that's getting in touch with whatever creative outlets you haven't tried yet. If it's cooking, right? It's the little things that give us life, that God has instilled in us to bring us joy in ordinary days and sad days, and in days where we can clearly see the hand of God in our lives. So I want to encourage people, especially our young people, to get in touch with that God thing inside of you that brings about joy in creation, and a reminder that we are all divine.
Yes, yes. Reverend Myrna, would you like to?
I would say that self-care is self-love. It's about beginning the process of loving yourself just as you are, and knowing that you are worthy of love, you are worthy of respect, you are worthy of rest, and you are worthy to be seen as human.
That's good. Reverend Maureen, take us out.
Yeah, I am just honored to be in this space with these incredible women, and I'm grateful for all that I've learned that was poured into me just listening to your work and the contributions that you made today, and certainly, Minister Lisa, for you putting this together today. So thank you so much for inviting me into this space, and it's an extra treat that I did get to see Minister Barbara. It is, that's just my truth. So I'm delighted in this space. One of the things that really sort of feeds us when we talk about self-care, and certainly feeds me, and I got an opportunity to even see today, which is why I said that the March on Washington, yes, it held the weight, the heaviness of this moment, but I also was in community with my brothers and sisters, and it was an experience of self-care, and that there were incredible creatives in the space. I mean, everything from the posters that were drawn, the pictures, the pictorials, the way that we wore expressions of hope and justice on our bodies, the music that we heard, the creative dances that we saw, the creative gifts and trinkets in the marketplace that was created. And so creativity for me is self-care. Like anytime that we can move in creative space, even in church space, liturgical dancing, just a creative place of the liturgy is just a way of soothing my soul, right? Replenishing my soul. And again, I'm just mindful of my sister, Lucille Clifton, Dr. Clifton, and she said, come, celebrate with me.
Mhm.
That every day something has tried to kill me and it has failed. I mean,
Mm.
that's quite an invitation of self care.
Yes.
And so there is this invitation to come and celebrate with me. And I think that we have not done enough block parties. Like when I was a little girl, we used to take over sections of the neighborhood,
Right.
right? Put
I
in our
remember
permits
those.
and have them shut it
Yes.
down and
Yeah.
inconvenience some folk for a
Mhm.
few hours, right? And you know our few hours, right? So for a
Right.
few hours, and we had our block parties, right? And that is just like self care all day. And so those are absolutely, acts of resistance when we move and breathe and have our being.
Mhm.
Acts 17:28 says, "It is in God that we live and move and have our being."
Yes.
That is an act of resistance. That is an expression of self care,
Yeah.
moving, living, and having our being.
I am so grateful for each of you ladies and for the work that you're doing. I just pray that God would continue to bless you and just expand your territory as you continue to serve our communities and bring us all together. I just want to remind everyone to visit www.thefreedomsummer.org. If you have not registered to vote, please visit this site, go check your voters registration, register to vote. It's important. We need you to get out there. There's less
Yes.
than, 73 days? There's approximately 73, 74 days to election day.
Yep.
Everyone go out and vote. We heard so much on this discussion about community. I would say vote in community. Go out there in community. Put on your mask, social distance, but you could still move there in community to the polls. So I thank
Absolutely.
you ladies for being here and just thank you. Pretty much.
Thank
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 you.
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 Thank
Pleasure
you. I'll be
is.
in touch with you all soon. All right. Have a great and blessed day.
You
Bye-bye.
too.
God bless
Bye
you.
bye.